Welcome to our viewers. I'm your host, Sri Iyer from PGurus.com. Today is Brexit Day. That is the day that United Kingdom officially leaves the European Union. And to talk about that, we are joined by Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji. Pandit ji, welcome to PGurus channel.
Pranam Sri Iyer ji, namaskar to all the viewers as well. It's great to be here on such a pivotal day. A game-changing historical event is going on in Europe, and it's wonderful to be able to share some ideas and some observations about it with you.
And now that UK has Brexited, where to go? I've got a new word. What comes next? What comes next?
Well, it's a part of it. There is a sense in the country, which is probably the same sort of sense Britain had when it ventured out onto the oceans, not knowing what was out there, right?
and they were not the first ones either.
Yeah. And so there are courageous people who are saying, well, actually, the shackles are off, and we can now go and explore new relationships, establish new agreements and understandings, and participate in a new world. You know, we've been tied to this Europe thing, and now that's no longer going to hinder us. So there is always the positive group who see that the glass is half full. And there are obviously that glass is half empty bunch who, some of them feel that they've actually lost the glass, it's been taken away from them forcibly. And so they are struggling to adjust to this new reality. But yes, in Parliament Square there are celebrations going on, very large numbers of crowds with British flags. There is a sense of relief that no matter where we take this boat, the British people are feeling, well, we'll be the ones taking it. You know, if it ends up on the rocks, hey, we'll be responsible for it. At least somebody else hasn't navigated us into the shallows. So there is a definite sense of celebration out there. And there is a quiet, sulky sort of sense about the groups who were very anti-Brexit. They're resigned to it. They're becoming accustomed to the reality, never believing that it actually was going to be such a failure for them. But I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think it's long overdue. At last, we have got the sense back in the country that this is a democracy, that when the people vote, Parliament has to follow and listen. And I think that's going to be the biggest healing aspect of this whole issue. At long last, that's back in play.
So people have spoken, and you know, while all this was going on, the spotlight was completely on the Great Britain. Oh, these guys are exiting, these guys are exiting, these guys are exiting. And no one really talked about what was happening across the channel in the EU itself. What kind of rumblings do you see coming down the EU's way? Nobody has shined a spotlight at EU. What's happening there? What is in future for EU? Are we going to have more like Brexit and Spexit and Itexit and so on and so forth?
Well, that's a wonderful observation, and you're absolutely right. I think one of the PR successes that the EU managed was to convince everyone that Britain was going to leave, and hey, the EU was going to be absolutely fine. That, you know, we will carry on business as usual, and that's far from the truth. The reality is starkly different. And if you look at the European context, in a global context, I think there is a shift occurring which the European former colonial Christian cabal, it's a bloc of basically former colonial countries who are all driven by a Christian ethos. It's a white Christian trading bloc. And that trading bloc, I don't think, is aware that the decolonization process of the planet is also underway in a huge way. And if decolonization continues, then Africa, which is now getting back onto its feet, and African nations are openly welcoming members of their community who were taken forcibly and tossed into far-flung corners of the world to be slaves, Africa is welcoming them back. And many are going back to establish businesses and enterprises in Africa. The Australians are finding their own identity. India is also saying, okay, we had 1400 years of first Islamic colonialism and then Christian British colonialism, and that period is now over, and we're going to reconnect with our original trajectory, which was a dharmic trajectory. So the world around Europe is shifting really fast. Now, if that momentum continues, the bonds that bound Europe together are naturally going to become weaker. And the European nations, each and every one of them has its own colonial footprint. which, as by and large, is unaddressed. Britain has got a terrible colonial history with India. Belgium has got a terrible colonial history with the former Congo and African states. Germany, likewise. France, which is still receiving billions from its former colonies. All of these relationships are going to come right into the foreground, and Europe will, I'm absolutely confident, the European state will actually start to disconnect, and the nation states will start to become very, very much more at the forefront. They will paint it in all sorts of unpleasant manners, that it's the rise of the far right and it's, nationalism, etc., etc. But what it really is the people of all of these nations reasserting their own indigenous identity. And so as that happens, Europe is about to enter a very traumatic and turbulent period. I'm quite certain of it. And from the Indian point of view, it's a great opportunity. It will
Absolutely.
be a shift in the power structures of the world.
Absolutely, and the Sanatana Dharma has been around for 15,000 years or even longer. Nobody knows when it started. The word itself is eternal flow, and that means that this is eternal, and it can provide that leadership in Dharma and what is the purpose of life for the whole world. Now, you just returned from a trip of India and Malaysia and other countries. Now, what is your perception? You've been very active. You've had some seminars, conventions, and so on and so forth. Perhaps you can dwell a little bit on your findings about, what you've done, what you have achieved by meeting all the people from all these various countries.
Well, the trip was focused around New Delhi, where we held Dharma Rising 2020, the first of the Dharma Rising 2020 conferences in New Delhi. And in New Delhi, it gave us a great opportunity to start to talk about some of the shifts that are occurring outside of India and how India is being perceived outside of India. The completely negative spin that the Euro-Christian media networks continuously pour onto India. That's now, the Indians are developing an immune system which is rejecting the continuous wave of criticism. One of the conference elements that we talked about, we discussed this issue that you have so many countries whose human rights records are absolutely appalling. They are devastating. Multiple genocides continuing right now, and yet nobody objects to them. Nobody really gives them short shrift. But the moment some tiny incident happens in India, the global network whizzes into action. And India is now recognizing that this is a phenomenon, that this is an imbalance, and it's also a response which is fear-based. So that the more the BBC and the likes of The Guardian, etc., pour scorn and heap criticism onto India, in fact, from this point onwards, what they're doing is they're helping India develop an even thicker skin, because Indians have recognized culturally and economically that the interests of the Western media is actually not the same as the interests of the Indian nation. This is not just confined to India. I spent a bit of time in Malaysia, and in Malaysia, it was lovely to see where we have an established economic community. They're quite strong, and they have old roots going a long way away. The indigenous people of the Malaysian continent call themselves Bhumiputra, and yet they don't really have an association, an intrinsic identification that India is the nation that their ancestors were connected with. And yet, over there, what we're finding now is that the Hindu community, especially the Indian community by and large, are actually now beginning to interact in places and spaces where they've actually been quite dormant. They're creating very much more community-centric activities. They're creating seva centers. We visited one seva center in KL, and in the space of only a matter of months, there are, I think, 166 students who come to this particular center, and they come and they learn traditional Indian sciences, dance, culture, and all of those sorts of things. And suddenly that seva center idea has mushroomed, and I think there are another 22 in the pipeline. And so
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Massive. This is massive. Yeah.
Right.
So those sorts of things are happening. And the other thing I noticed is that they're becoming very active in the two places where we have to now engage. We have the four Varnas, and they're actually the four powers of society: knowledge and wisdom. We have resources, wealth and land, for example. We have law and justice. And then you have manpower. And Hindus and Indians, especially wherever we go, we always focus on two things. One is knowledge. We're very knowledgeable people. We like to become very intellectual. We educate our kids, etc. And the other is land and resources. And we build and establish good economic communities. We contribute to the exchequer. But the two areas, the other two, we actually have never engaged in. One of those is law and justice, and the other is manpower. Now, in both of those areas, we're weak and we're exposed. And what I'm finding, and I'm strongly going to recommend everybody to take this on board, is that wherever the Indian community is, wherever the Hindu community is, we have to influence law, which means get into politics so that we can contribute a dharmic perspective to the way in which justice is delivered. And we have to get into manpower. And now manpower means reaching out to all of the communities who are native to where we are immigrants. So in the UK, this means we have to reach out to the temple communities and say, right, go and mix with the English communities. Let's teach them yoga. Let's teach them asana. Let's teach them about our cuisine and why herbs and spices are medicinal. You know, let's teach them about the science of meditation. We have to actively go out and mingle and mix with these communities, and we will see a dramatic resurgence. The European communities, the European population, the general public, are desperate for this. They are very, very open to receive this, and we actually need to proactively now contribute and participate at that level, into law, into politics, and into the well-being of the whole community wherever we are immigrants. And I'm seeing this in Malaysia, and I'm beginning to see the appearance of this here in the UK now.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more. And by the way, you touched on a sore topic of mine, which is the state of the Hindus in Pakistan. I mean, every day there is a story of a girl being kidnapped and being forcibly converted into Islam and being married off. Now, there are a lot of diaspora of Pakistani origin in UK. What are their thoughts about this? And is there any way, UK being the father of all these things, is there something in legislation that UK can bring about that kind of wraps these people on the knuckles? Because every time this happens, the Indian government calls the Pakistani High Commissioner and then gives him a lecture, and it probably enters one ear and goes out the other, and these things continue to happen. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a very, very emotive and a desperate situation. So there are a couple of dimensions to it which I think are probably worth noting. One is that we've seen the loss of the minority communities in Pakistan from 24% down to less than 1%. And this is a dramatic loss. And if you look at how it's been done, kidnapping the young daughters of a minority community is a very effective way of extinguishing the future of that community. If there are no daughters, if there are no women who are part of that community and who can participate in furthering that community, having children, building families, then what you're doing is actually immediately wiping out the future prospect of that community. It is genocide through theft of one particular very important part of any community. So it's targeted and it's deliberate. This is not something that's just an accident. It's not just something which is cultural and an aberration. There is a plan, and that plan is being executed. Now, I've had, in fact, only yesterday I was with one of the sheikhs, a professor from Al-Azhar Muslim University in Egypt, and we were having this conversation. And one thing really struck me, and that is that outside of the Indian diaspora area, the view in the Muslim world of Pakistan is actually very, very negative. They are at pains to say this is not our Islam, that what Pakistan is doing is not sanctioned. And, you know, we are as embarrassed and ashamed of the manner in which they claim to be an Islamic state, and yet they are so far away from Allah's Islam, as Tariq Fatehji says. Now, what we have noticed here in the UK is that the activities of the Pakistani community here are equally unpalatable to the British community. And the protests, the ridiculous burning of effigies and flag burning, etc., the UK population has looked at it with a great deal of distaste. And if anything, if you add to it the attacks on the daughters of the indigenous white population here in the UK, we see the same philosophy at play. And this is now becoming recognized, and I think it's only a question of time before the UK authorities and the UK population demand that something is done about this. There is going to be a period of great uncertainty and upset for the Pakistani community, but their leaders really do need to step up and take cognizance of this fact that tolerance will only go so far. And attacking the daughters of a society and a community is probably one of the actions that you can do to catapult intolerance to its extremes very, very rapidly.
I have a question for you, sir, and this is that Sharia is being practiced in some parts of United Kingdom. Is that legal?
It's one of those grey areas. We have a uniform civil code, a penal code and criminal code, etc., here in the country. But parallel to it, there is the canonical code, the Christian code, the code of law which the church uses. And so Sharia sort of butts up and says, hey guys, we've also got our religious code and we want to be able to use it. And they use it and apply it in some places of law, such as domestic disputes, property disputes, etc., inheritance and so on. And it's sort of overlooked. It's frowned upon, it's overlooked, but I think until the members of the Pakistani community, the Muslim community themselves, turn away from Sharia and say, actually, we want justice from the British legal system, it's unlikely that anything will happen to it. And it does receive informal acknowledgement and acceptance, especially in those areas where the Labour Party are traditionally very strong and supported by that minority.
Sir, I think the thing has to start from the incredibly generous social support system that the United Kingdom has for all those people who live in that country. You have to earn that right. You cannot just be granted that right. What you're seeing, and it's been happening for many, many years, is that people come to United Kingdom for its social support services, that they can, once they land, they have free hospital visits, they have some kind of a dole, and they essentially are becoming a burden to your society. Why isn't this government looking at that as a top priority and say that you have to earn your keep? Otherwise, sorry guy, you have to go back to where you came from.
It's a complicated position, and there are many groups and sectors who completely and wholeheartedly agree with the position that you put forward, that until a nation can look after its own tax-paying citizens, where is the moral justification for looking after the citizens of the world? You know, it's nice to be magnanimous, and it's that it's that old adage, isn't it, that it's easy to be charitable with somebody else's money.
Yes,
and
yes.
Sadly, our politicians, especially on the left, have got a great deal of mileage out of being charitable for non-citizens at the expense of the UK citizens, and that is changing. There is an interesting development which would be worth touching on just briefly, and that is the continuing implosion of the Labour Party. And obviously, we're talking about a group who are very much aligned with the Labour Party. But here is an interesting set of developments. We have just seen an 80-seat majority victory given to the Conservatives at a time when nobody really expected it. It was a bolt from the blue from all of the pundits and the pollsters. Now, the team that architected that are actually now in a position of power. And the team who put that together, Boris Johnson and his team, they're actually, I get the sense that they have now decided that in the same way that they were radical, that they were creative, enterprising in their approach to the election campaign, they're bringing that same approach into government now. So today we have Brexit obviously happening, but another interesting development has happened, and that's that Boris Johnson and his cabinet, they are spending time in a place called Sunderland, which is way up north. It's part of that red wall that used to be Labour. And what I've heard is that this outreach is now going to be a monthly affair, that they're going to take the civil servants, you know, the Sir Humphreys and people of that ilk.
Yes.
Right?
I was going to bring that up, and you...
They're going to take them out of the Westminster bubble and directly into the heartland of the British population and engage at a very, very detailed and a close level to try and break this notion that Westminster, which is the tail which has been dragging the dog of the English people for so long, that is going to be shifted. Now, this is an enterprising choice to say, yes, we're going to take the cabinet up and down the country one day each month, and connect with the people. So it's a different way of adjusting and changing the political scenes to a new reality. Now, the Labour Party, all of their new leadership candidates, I don't think they've realised that the ground is shifting underneath them. That there's a team in number 10 who are quite happy to reorganise, reconfigure, to deconstruct and reconstruct the whole British political environment and background and bring it up to date in accordance with what the people of this country need. And if the Labour Party don't realise that soon enough, I think what they'll be doing is still playing the politics of the 30s and the 40s, maybe even the 50s. Let's bring them up to speed. And it's not going to get them anywhere at all. And the people will be leaving them. Boris is very effective as a charm. His charm offensive is quite effective. And if he's going up and down the country and they are beginning to deliver change and people are beginning to feel that, yes, the nation is coming together, suddenly the country will be in a place where the Labour Party is so far out in the cold that it will not connect. And this is a major, major concern.
Wow. And lastly, for today's topic, the Ministry of External Affairs in India has promised a thorough cleanup from bottom up. And I would like to take credit for some of this introspection on their part, because we have been ruthlessly pointing out some of these errors. Now, I have one out of the park, out of the left field idea, Satish ji, and tell me what you think, whether I'm, smoking weed or what. What I was thinking was, instead of having, the OCI is okay, but what I'd like to see is if could be a win-win situation whereby Indian NRIs of Indian origin who have had India's Indian passport in the past be given a dual citizenship now, as long as they pay, say, $1,500 for like 5 years or 10 years, whatever the time that they usually give passports for, and after that it becomes an automatic renewal just like any other citizen. Because I bet that a lot of people will sign up because they would like to help their Janmabhoomi at a time when it is going through a crisis. And giving citizenship gives you a certain pride where you can go in and enjoy the same rights as everybody else and be also part of the electoral process. For example, it would increase the IQ of the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. I'm sure people may not agree with me when I say this, but it is my contention that if given the chance and if they do a good job, that you might see some NRIs finding their places there, and that will essentially open the country to the ways of the world. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a great deal of truth in that, and I think it's an out-of-the-box sort of an idea. But I'd be surprised if it hadn't already been considered in the corridors of power. We have just seen for the first time our honourable MP Bob Blackman being awarded a Padma Shri.
Yeah,
and
that was a good one. Yeah,
that is an outreach example, and that's a really great idea.
Yes,
there is a need. India has been closed in many ways for a long period of time, and it's like any civilization which has had a millennium of being on the receiving end of violence from toxic minorities, right? India is now beginning to reconnect and reintegrate its own identity. So it's fully understandable that there are people now in places of influence where perhaps their journey to those places it hasn't equipped them with the demands of what they've now got to face. And we have high commissioners, we have ministers in these various high commissions, and you can see that they're the products of a residual colonial Indian foreign service, especially one which was deeply molded and engineered by the Congress party. And so we have people in positions of diplomatic influence who perhaps are very much uncomfortable with the reality of being in countries where now there are Indian diaspora who are probably 1 or 2 generations ahead of them in terms of version 1.0, 2.0.
yes.
And so there is a disconnect. Now, we've always had the approach that we want to work with the High Commissioners and do the best we can, contribute, give them intelligence, invite them into the networks and work with them. But on occasion, we find, and sadly on too many occasions, we find that working with them has, on occasion, a negative outcome. So intelligence may be shared, or they will make a choice and a decision which is so uninformed as to harm the diaspora community. We've talked about it briefly, the manner in which the British Indian High Commission here has always been very close to the left, to Labour, to the socialist side of things, and that has really harmed the Indian community time and time again. I noticed that even recently, the Indian High Commissioner was sharing a platform with some individuals who are very, very corrosively critical of the British Indian community and indeed of Modiji's government, CAA 370. And so there are issues there. On my recent trip to New Delhi, I did meet with some of the parliamentarians and had a wonderful opportunity to synchronize and just to connect with Dr. Swami as well. And this is a known problem. I understand that the MEA do realize that they need to upgrade the quality of their diplomatic missions around the world, and I'm really looking forward to them doing that. But I really do hope that they take advantage of the fact that they have scattered around the world people like yourself, people like myself, who are very comfortable. We have one foot in each of the two nations, and
Yes.
we want the best for both of the nations, and we can contribute in both directions. And there are many, many more like us. We're an asset which is really desperately needing to be used. And I'm hoping that our new Dr. Jaishankarji is aware of this, and we'll make some moves towards it. If they don't, it'll be the usual thing where we try and embrace the high commissioners. We find that actually they have no clue of what's going on, and just for our own protection, we then say, okay, we'll put them back in the box and leave them there, and we'll come back to the next one in due course. But I think the message is getting through. From what I hear, we have some major shifts going on there. While I have your ear, I've heard a rumor about only today about the BBC Hindi service in New Delhi being dramatically curtailed and diminished, or maybe even having shut shop. Have you heard anything through your networks?
Well, there have been some buzz about that, and we are
Hmm.
gathering information, and you will see it on PGurus first, because this is something that's so close to India's MSN that they will choke before they publish something like this.
Oh dear.
We have no such string. We don't have any constraints of that nature. We will
Yeah.
publish the news as it happens. So stay tuned, folks. Something big coming up.
Well, the BBC is being pummeled here in the UK. There is a very strong opinion now, becoming a consensus, that they should not be funded by license fees compulsorily. Basically, it's another tax on the British citizen, and that rather than being an extension of the British military intelligence divisions and their propaganda, that they should really become a genuine 21st century news service. So ripples going all around, it would seem, from that as well.
Well, they can start by interviewing you.
I doubt it, but I look forward to the invitation. It'll be a good development. But
Yes.
this is also a sign of the changing times. The world is moving out of that terrible dark millennium of. There's a term I'm going to introduce. In the UK we have black and minority ethnic.
Yes.
Right, and the default way in which the political establishments throughout Europe, America, deal with people of our background is that we're bundled together as a BAME community and dealt with in that manner. Whereas our Indian community here, we're actually a British community. We think of ourselves as British citizens. We don't really want anything or any special favors. So this notion that we're a BAME has always rankled a little bit. But I'm doing a little bit of writing, and I'm going to introduce the term WAME, which is white and majority ethnic. Because in the same way that there are certain identifying factors, wherever white and majority ethnic people seem to gather, there are particularly problematical identity markers which need to be explored. And I think we could probably contribute a lot of wisdom to the WAME community in the same manner that they seek to contribute their opinions and guidance and support to the BAME community. So WAME, white and majority ethnic, you heard it here first.
Awesome, and we look forward to more such interesting hangouts. Thank you very much, Panditji.
Pranamji, Jayaji, and namaskar to everybody, and look
Namaskar.
forward to our next conversation.
Namaskar.